Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the number one student podcast in the world, the Student Podcast. First thing I'd like to say is excuse my voice. I'm a little bit ill at the moment and I've got a bit of a cough. So if I start having like a coughing fit, don't mind me. I'm just trying to sort myself out. I'm a little bit ill at the moment. Architecture's kind of taken over my life recently. So today we're going to discuss my final presentation, which was last week. So it's kind of like my first final presentation in kind of like our studio projects so far this year in third year. So I'm now officially like almost halfway through getting my degree, which is mad. So I'm almost halfway through third year, which is unbelievable, seeing as that it feels like yesterday that I was in first year and now I'm in halfway through third year. It's coming up to Christmas. I think this is my last week before breaking up for Christmas. And we're closing in on getting a degree. It's mad. I know I've got another, obviously, 4 years until I become a fully professional architect, probably 5 years. But we're getting there. We're knocking off the years. We're knocking off the time. I'm learning a lot at the moment. As you can see, I've got loads of books here to my right, as I'm reading a lot at the moment. So yeah, I thought today I'd just do a pretty chilled out one. As you can tell, I'm on my own. I haven't been able to get a guest in for this week, I'm afraid. Because I'm going home over Christmas. I'm not sure how many kind of architecture people I'm going to be able to get in, but I'm going to try and get some guests in. I might try and get some mates in and have like a group podcast, which might be quite interesting. I might get some of the lads in or something. I'll speak to them and see what they want to do, and obviously let me know if that's something you'd want to see. And we'll kind of talk through a couple of stories, a couple holidays we've been on, etc., and that could be quite fun. And obviously get some kind of pointers off their experience at university and that kind of stuff. So that's probably what I'm going to try and do over Christmas. I might even try and get my mum on or my sister and kind of talk to them, because obviously my mum, well not obviously, but my mum is a teacher and she's been teaching for the past like 15 years. She's like head of business and economics or something. I couldn't even tell you. So that would be quite cool if I could ask her a couple of questions on how she thinks the education system, etc., is from her perspective, which could be quite cool. Another thing I want to mention is the fact that I've actually got a light here. So I've got some white light because it's a bit of a dull day today. We're now getting into winter. It's getting dark at like 3 o'clock, which is absolutely ridiculous. So I've got myself a white light here. It's actually Jacob's from upstairs, but I'm thinking of investing in a couple of them kind of circle white lights, just to make the lighting a little bit better. I feel that looks much better. Let me know down below if you agree. It's much better than like the orange light, because my lamps in here are very orangey, and the wallpaper's creamy and it's just a bit grim. So I'm thinking of putting some stuff up on the wall there. I might even pin up my work from my final presentation up there for the next few podcasts if I get many filmed this week. So yeah, last Thursday was my final presentation. And what I mean by final presentation, it's not like our final hand-in, but it was kind of like it's called a formative review. So we've got formative reviews and then we've got summative reviews. Summative are basically your final grade, like your final hand-in, which is basically going to be our portfolio hand-in in January. So I think our portfolio hand-in is the 9th of January, which is basically going to be like a published book. So we get it binded properly and everything. So I think I'm going to go somewhere and get that printed properly. And then we also just pin up one kind of board, which is going to pretty much just give you like a teaser of the project. And then you leave your portfolio there so they can mark that. And then they mark the work on the wall. So this kind of final presentation was like our last opportunity to get feedback on the project. So most of the time it's not your final work, but a lot of the time I want to try and get as much work done as possible for those final reviews, so that I can get as much feedback as possible. So if I can get like an almost final kind of like portfolio, then obviously you can get as much feedback as possible, and maybe over Christmas you might not have to improve it as much, or you're just doing little bits and bobs here just to get them extra marks in a grade boundary or whatever you're trying to do. So I like pretty much grafted like for this final presentation. I went 2 weeks, staying up till probably about 3 o'clock every night. I think the latest I went to bed was like 4:30, which I guess isn't bad, but I didn't expect to be going up, or I wouldn't expect to be staying up that late so early on in third year. So throughout second year, I made a point to not go to bed late. I made a point to stick to my kind of like my health, go to bed nice and early, get up a little bit earlier, so I can have a more productive morning and productive day, and then go to bed earlier, just so I can get some better quality sleep, just so I'm in a better routine and everything. But so far in third year, obviously the first few months I suffered with insomnia, so I really struggled to get to sleep. And then it kind of got better, like really good. My sleep got much, much better. And then I went 2 weeks staying up till 3 a.m. Doing work. And I'm not actually joking. I woke up, first thing I did when I woke up, sat on my laptop, did work until 3 the following evening, or the following morning, which is basically, if you are going into study architecture or you're currently studying architecture, you will understand that. But I think a lot of people don't actually realise how much work you've got to put into. Okay, yes, you might not have to work as hard as I do, but I just want to do as best as I possibly can, and I put so much pressure on myself to do really well. So I do stay up late. I do make sure I do the extra bit of work to make sure I'm kind of putting myself ahead, because I want to make an impact. I want to do really, really well. I want to be like a top architect, and I'm not going to do that if I'm not going to work hard. So I do sacrifice some things. Obviously, I haven't been to the gym. You're gonna think this is crazy. I haven't been to the gym in 3.5 weeks. Well, that's a lie, actually. I went to the gym at the weekend, but before then, I hadn't been to the gym in 3.5 weeks, which is absolutely crazy for me. So since I started training, the longest I'd gone off going to the gym was probably 2 weeks, and that's probably because I was on holiday. Whereas I've gone 3.5 weeks without going to the gym, and I can notice it. Like, my sleep's been all over the place. I haven't been training. I've been eating McDonald's, pizza all day, every day, because when I'm at uni all day, it's just the easiest thing, it's the cheapest thing, it's the quickest thing I can get, and it does the job, so I'm not stressing about going home, cooking food and then coming back, etc. It's just easy to do. So to be honest, my health has been completely out of the window the past few weeks, which is obviously not ideal. I probably should balance myself a little bit better, but I'm kind of like that all-in kind of person. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to give it my all. So yeah, my balance just kind of went out the window the past few weeks. And kind of building up to the final review, I was getting tighter and tighter, but I did really well. I was happy with kind of like the work I produced at the end. It's really good living with Jacob, who's also an architect student himself, so it's really good that we can kind of push each other along the way. Maybe if he wants to go to bed and he's still got some work to do, I'll say, no bro, stay up for an extra hour or so, get this work done, then go to bed. And we kind of push ourselves on and we spur each other along. And it's kind of very rewarding when you come to these final presentations and we put up our work and it's like, we have grafted for this, and I'm really happy with the work I've produced. So yeah, the final review went pretty well. I'll briefly kind of talk about some of the work I did, because I did post a picture on my Instagram of me kind of stood next to the panel with holding my portfolio with my glasses on, if you didn't notice. I was looking a bit scruffy. I hadn't had a haircut or anything. I was looking tired, but it is what it is. I didn't actually have time to go home to get a haircut because I don't trust any barbers in Birmingham. I know I probably should, but I think basically what happened was in first year, I went to get my haircut at barbers in Digbeth, and they absolutely butchered it. They absolutely ruined my hair. I was just like, what have you done? And I'm someone who's very kind of cautious about my haircut. I'm very cautious about my hair. If I feel someone kind of cutting it a little bit wrong or not normal, I'm starting thinking like, what is this person doing? So about 2 years ago, I got my haircut in Birmingham for the first time, and it absolutely ruined it. I had to wear a hat for like 3 weeks to wait for my hair to grow back. And even my barber, when I went back home, he was like, what has this guy done? Like, he was awful. You've got an awful barber. Anyway, so I haven't gone to Birmingham barbers since because I don't trust anyone other than my barber back at home. So whenever I need a haircut, I would drive all the way back to Nottingham, get my haircut, then come back. So usually it's a bit of a hassle, obviously driving an hour to get my haircut and then coming back. So obviously on deadline week, when I had so much work to do, there was just no point in me kind of adding that extra stress to me just to get a haircut, just to kind of make myself feel better for the presentation. But yeah, my presentation, so kind of my whole project, I know I've mentioned things previously in the podcast, and I know I've kind of me, Josh, and obviously Scott have spoke about kind of like the structure of the studio. So it's very conceptual. We are called the in situationists, if I said that right. And it's all about basically context. It's all about how the wider context can affect and how we can basically design based on context. But I kind of took a different route, and I based my whole design on movement. So obviously movement is not a fixed thing. So a lot of the time someone will kind of do mapping of, I don't know, windows around Digbeth. Someone would do mappings of like factories or graffiti, and it's obviously a very fixed element. They don't move, they stay still. Whereas obviously movement is not fixed, it moves, it's different in different areas. So I based my whole project basically on the movement of this one person that walked through my site. And I did, so I basically did a mapping from above with a drone, which would map direction. And then I did mapping from below, so on ground level, which would map speed, and then using time as kind of like my rule. So I basically broke down movement into those three components: direction, speed, and time. So a big inspiration of mine was Bernard Tschumi, which I've discussed previously on the podcast. And this is one of his books that I've been reading. I also looked into Red Is Not a Colour and the Manhattan Transcript, which are fantastic books. They're like unbelievable. They're very old, and they're also, if you don't want to read the books, they've got some. He basically does a lecture that talks through the whole book on YouTube. So if you type in Red Is Not a Colour, Bernard Tschumi in YouTube, it actually comes up with an 1.5 hour lecture that he talks through the whole 800-page book. So that's a good way of him kind of breaking it down. You understand it a little bit better if you watch that. So if you are interested in Bernard Tschumi, I would advise you to kind of watch the lecture before trying to read like a 900 page book, which would probably drive you insane. So Bernard Tschumi's process is basically, he investigates basically movement and how that can inform architecture, kind of like the relationship between the two and the relationship with events, with time, with sequence, and he breaks down kind of action in architecture into the event, the plan, and the movement within the plan, and that's kind of like his process of breaking down action within each event. So he uses photography and film, and then he also takes inspiration from Sergei Eisenstein, so not to be mistaken with Einstein. I think his name's Eisenstein, who's a film theorist. And he basically uses as an inspiration to kind of visually represent his work using kind of like sequences, using like a timeline, because Eisenstein was a film theorist, so he looks at choreography, the movement in choreography, in dance, and he also looks at breaking down kind of scenes within frames, which was pretty much what my whole project was based about. So those two were like an unbelievable precedent for me, like big inspirations for my work, and they go hand in hand very well. So it was very good for me to kind of run my project along his theories and his process. Obviously not copying it, because that's something you don't want to do. You don't want to copy other people's work, or you don't want to copy someone else's process, but you interpret in your own way. You take bits from it and you say, I've done this because I was interested in how Bernard Tschumi did this and how he broke down action. So I kind of used this idea and I broke down movement into direction, time, and speed. And that's kind of what set off my whole project. And that kind of brought me down to, I've kind of got this form at the moment. So once I kind of broke down kind of like the mapping and the movement, so I mapped the double pendulum swing, which was obviously how the human walks, so from the hip, the knee, and the heel, and I did a mapping of this guy walking through the frame, and I mapped every single double pendulum swing, and then I did kind of like created a field diagram using the frame size. It's quite complicated, it's quite difficult to explain, but if you kind of following through what I'm saying right now, you probably understand what's going on. So using the frame size, I could then create a field diagram, which I then put onto my site, because the drone that I flew from the top, obviously that has a frame size. So the frame that I filmed from ground level and the frame that I filmed from upper level, I combined them because they're exactly the same frame size, and I was looking at events, a movement, speed, direction through that individual frame. So my rule allowed me to combine the two of them, and that then obviously allowed me to put that on top of a plan because I'd rotated the drone to a specific direction, etc. And that gave me a field diagram, and then I used basically film technique So film techniques to kind of break down that information and to give me a form. So I used continuous editing, which is basically breaking down frames continuously in an evenly fashion. And then I used jump cut editing, which is basically creating a lack of continuity. So in my field diagram, I removed every other shape to create a lack of continuity. And then a montage, which is basically combining information and creating like an overall story of kind of like your previous filming, etc. So I basically combined my two kind of proposals that I got, which then eventually gave me like my final form. And that was pretty much my whole project. I know it sounds unbelievably conceptual, because it is. It's really interesting. I personally have really enjoyed it. So we've now got 4 weeks left to kind of make some changes, improve it, and do kind of like our final portfolio submission, which is going to be in January, like I've already mentioned. So because I've kind of worked really, really hard up to this point, it kind of gives me a bit of alleviation over Christmas to maybe chill out a little bit more, because I'd much rather work hard in kind of like the time that I'm at uni, and then obviously when I go home for Christmas over 3 weeks, I don't want to be obviously grafting all day every day up till 3 o'clock. So it kind of just gives me some alleviance, and I can chill out a little bit more. I can have a couple more days off potentially, but we've also got some other modules going on at the moment, which is obviously going to once again stop me from relaxing. So yeah, that was kind of how the final presentation went. I presented, so we had 10 minutes to present, and then I think we had 20 minutes for feedback, so it's half an hour per person. So I had 3 people kind of keeping an eye on me, 3 tutors. One of them was an external tutor, which I'd never met before, and it was interesting because after I'd kind of spoke about everything, I kind of spoke about Bernard Schumi, I was thinking, yes, like, I know what I'm talking about. And this guy, first thing he says, oh, thanks for the presentation, and then he goes, oh, by the way, I'm a massive Bernard Schumi fan, so I pretty much know every single thing about him. I've read every single book that he's produced, and I'm thinking, oh no, here's me thinking I know everything about him. And then this guy starts asking me questions about Bernard Schumi, and I'm looking at him like half asleep. I'm looking at him like, please don't ask me these questions, because I couldn't give you an answer. So he kind of said a load of things about Bernard Schumi and some of his process and some of his architecture, and then he kind of asked me a question. I just went blank, and I just kind of like, yeah, I didn't really know how to answer that question, which is a little bit awkward, because my tutor did warn me that if you're gonna kind of do research into someone, make sure you know every single thing about them, which is obviously understandable. So if you guys are using any precedents, or you're using any kind of theories or architects to kind of back your work, make sure you know every single thing about them, because if you start getting questioned by an external examiner or an external tutor, you're probably going to start crumbling at a presentation, and that's not what you want to do. You want to come across as confident as possible, and you want to come across that you have done your research and you know exactly what you're talking about and exactly why they've kind of done their work, and that's why they've informed your work. So make sure you know every single thing about the person you're talking about. So for me, Bernard Schumi, yes, I didn't have to know when he was born. I didn't have to know his whole family story, but I did have to get a decent understanding on his process, his architecture, and also some of his inspirations as well. So like Sergei Eisenstein. So yeah, it's pretty successful. I'll get my grade on Thursday. It's not like a set in stone grade, like I've already mentioned. It's not a final review, so we don't obviously get a final grade for it because it's not completely done yet. But we do get like a grade boundary of kind of like where we are at currently, and maybe what we need to improve on for the final portfolio, and obviously the extra things that we've got to do. So this sheet here is like all of the work for the final portfolio handing. So I'm roughly about in the middle here. So I've still got some bits to do. I've still got plans, sections, visuals, like contextual plans, all that kind of stuff to show its location, how it looks from a roof plan. I've got all that kind of stuff to do left, but it was very much a conceptual design up to this point, and that was kind of like what the aim was for the final presentation, just to show like a form. And then in the second half of the year, we're going to then turn that form into a building. So it's going to be very much more architecture, I guess, if you want to say that. We're going to be designing a lot more. We're going to be obviously designing spaces, probably end up doing some form of digital model, which will give me my renders, all that kind of stuff. So that'll be kind of like the second half of the year, which is after January. But up till now, it's very much trying to get form based on the context, based on what was going on the site, based on what was going around the site. And yeah, movement was just something that I was interested in. I thought that'd be quite a cool conceptual route to go down. And yeah, it went well. So now I thought I'd just dive into some questions. I put some questions up on my Instagram. I put a kind of like a question poll up on my Instagram. And I actually got blooming loads of questions this time. I must have got probably about 50, which is unbelievable. So I've kind of broke down into kind of the good ones, and I thought that which would kind of relate well to kind of what I've spoke about so far. And then we've also got some questions that don't really relate. So I've got about 10 here, and I'll probably try and answer as many as possible, but I don't want this to go on for too long. First question we've got, is it best to include more imagery as opposed to text in presentation slides, and why? Okay, so firstly, 100% you want to include more imagery as opposed to text on presentation slides. So when we say presentation slides, do you mean like a PowerPoint? Because there's obviously different modules that have different types of presentations. So we've got our cultural context, which is obviously more essay based. It's more analytical based. So you'll have your diagrams, but then you obviously will have a bit of text. But then obviously if you've got your studio, you've got your projects, you don't really want any text really on the board. You kind of want everything to pop out and explain itself visually. And the reason why I say that is because if you've got someone that wants to, say if you've got loads of work pinned up on the wall, and some work has got loads of text on, some work is all visually, like beautiful work, like visually no text at all, maybe a couple of titles, etc. Which one are you going to kind of look at? Which one is going to draw your attention? Which one is going to kind of tell you more of a story? And I'd obviously say the visual one. You want people to kind of be drawn to your work. You want an examiner or a tutor to walk into kind of like the presentation space and spot your work, which is like a beautiful drawing, and kind of go over to that. And you want them to, you don't want to tell them everything by the drawing or the piece of work that's up on the wall. You want to kind of give them a snippet. So you don't, if you have text that explains every single thing, yes, that's good in explaining what's going on, but that's the kind of stuff you want in your portfolio. So we've got these little books that we are making at the moment. And text is, yes, you want to explain everything in your portfolio, but when you want work up on the wall, you kind of want that, you want them to kind of figure out what's going on. You don't want it to be too obvious. Yes, you want to explain kind of what's going on, but you don't really want text up there. I personally hate having text up on a wall. I usually just have maybe a little bit here and there just to explain little things that are going on. But you do not want big blocks of text. That's one thing that I would definitely say, because sometimes when you come to present as well, you'll stand there and you'll kind of start reading the text, and that's not what you want to do. When you want to present, you want to be stood there with your work next to you, talking to the tutors, and kind of your work following what you're saying. You don't want to be kind of turning and reading things off the wall, because it just doesn't come across very professionally. It doesn't come across very well. So yes, 100% have more imagery as opposed to text, because firstly, it's probably a bit more professional. You give that kind of suspense, and you kind of give them a reason to start kind of digging deeper and start asking questions, which is kind of what you want. Without text, or when you don't have text, it's probably going to pop a little bit more, which is what you want once again. So I hope that answers your question. Question number 2, we've got scale of 1 to 10, how stressed are you? So I know this person asked me this question when I put up my kind of question poll up. I think it was last Thursday or last Friday, straight after my presentation, and then I was stressed. Like, I was proper stressed. So leading up to the final presentation, I was worried. I was just as you would be for any kind of hand-in. You are stressed. You're obviously worried. Maybe even if you are ahead of the game and you know what you're doing, you still will be stressed, because you're worried whether the presentation is going to go well. You're worried about what the tutors are going to say. So you'll always be stressed out. But I was very, very stressed because I was just sleep deprived. I felt awful because I hadn't trained, hadn't been eating well. So it's kind of all them things coming together. My balance wasn't there. I wasn't really speaking to people. I was taking like hours and hours and hours to reply to people's texts just because I was so busy doing work, and I just literally sat looking at my laptop for so long. So yes, I was very stressed. So on actually the day after my presentation on Friday, we actually, some of our year did like critiquing for level 4, so for first years. So I was one of them people. So I went in to critique the first years, which was actually really fun. I've never done it before, and it's weird because it was kind of one of them situations where I'd been stressing so much about my work for so long, and then you go and sit in a presentation where obviously it's the other way around. You're the tutor and the level 4s are stressing about their work, and it's like when they ask you for feedback, it's quite relaxing because you're not worried that it's your own work. You kind of give them constructive feedback. Obviously, we were all very cautious about how much we were going to say because I think it was their first presentation. They're all very, very nervous. So we didn't obviously want to be brutal to them. So a lot of the time you'll say, yeah, that's a really good drawing. Maybe you could include this, include that, which would be a little bit better. A lot of them had a lot of text, so you'd give them kind of graphical input and that kind of stuff. So Friday was actually a good kind of like stress reliever. It kind of made me relax a lot more. Obviously sitting in a tutor's perspective, it was quite fun. But yeah, I was very stressed on the Thursday for the presentation. It's crazy because you kind of build yourself up for this. You build yourself up for weeks, for months, for this like final presentation. You stand up, you present 10 minutes, you've presented, and then it's done. It's crazy. It's like an anticlimax. You expect more from what just happened. It's like you like expect something to happen, and because you built yourself up so much, and you just present, and it's like, yeah, you're done. And then you're like, what do I do with myself? So over the weekend, I literally did nothing. I just caught up on sleep. So Saturday, I was in bed all day. I went out Saturday night, and I got very drunk, which was probably not a good idea. I mean, I needed to blow out a bit. Big summer blowout. Little TikTok reference there. I've also started watching a lot of TikTok, which I'm not sure I'm proud of. So yeah, I went out Saturday night. Sunday, I was hanging. Bearing in mind, I was ill at that point, so it was probably not a good idea for me to go out. And I think because I was ill, when I started drinking, it just went straight to my head. I didn't drink that much, and I was just absolutely steaming. It was not good. Sunday, I haven't hanged that much in a long time. I had a headache. I couldn't move. It wasn't good. And it was one of them nights where I started texting and ringing people that you do not want to do. So obviously, a lot of you students will know what I'm talking about. When you get waved, when you've had a couple of drinks, and you start texting people you shouldn't. It's not a good idea. Anyway, next question. Well, it's not a question. It just said, love your energy. Thank you very much. Do you really need glasses though? So obviously, thanks Andy. I know this was you that asked the question. No, I don't need the glasses. And I've already explained this on the podcast. I bought them to look more of an architect. I don't know if it's done anything for me. But yeah, so on my final presentation, I wore the glasses just because I thought, firstly, I was looking quite tired. So I thought the glasses might cover that up a little bit. And because I didn't really have too much smart clothes with me, so all my shirts and everything are back home, I thought I'd just make a little bit more of an effort just by putting some glasses on. It made me look a little bit smarter. I don't know. But no, I don't need glasses. Thank you for pointing that one out, Andy. We need to get you back on the show as well. If you want Andy, remember Andy from, I think it was the Studying Architecture Will Take Over Your Life podcast. If you want Andy back on, let me know because I'm sure you'll want to come on. What books are at the bottom? So the bottom of my presentation, so I'll put it on the screen for you now. So I had the Manhattan Transcript book. I had the Red Is Not a Colour book, which are the two books I've already discussed. I had this book at the bottom, which is another Bernard Shume one. And then I had this Drawing and Architecture book by Neil Spiller, I believe. Yep. Which is basically kind of just projects, and it just kind of helped me in representing some of my work visually. So stuff like this, pretty cool stuff. So I just used this as a bit of an inspiration. And then I had this book, the Cinemetrics book at the bottom, which also kind of breaks down the frame so which is what a lot of my work was based off, and I use this also kind of representing some of my ideas, because it's one thing having a lot of ideas, but then how you represent them is obviously vital in architecture. You don't want to put in loads of work. You don't want to have really lovely work and then present it really badly, which I'll go on to answer another question in a minute. So you want to kind of use a lot of books, a lot of, like, you want to look up on Instagram, on Pinterest, and find good examples of how to kind of represent your work graphically and make it look good, because it's the worst thing if you put in loads of effort into all your work and then you don't present it very well, and then it kind of comes across that you haven't really put too much effort in. So I think the crits and the presentation, the way you present yourself and the work, is vital. And for me, because I put so much work in, I want to make sure the presentation is perfect as well, to complement kind of how much effort I've put in. And I think that's what everyone should be doing, really. I think that's a given. But obviously some people do struggle with graphically representing their ideas and graphically representing their work. So they were the books that were at the bottom of my presentation. I specifically put them at the bottom to kind of make sure everyone knew that I was reading books, because when you do an architectural project and when you do a presentation, it's fantastic to have theory that's going to back up your ideas. It's fantastic to know that you have been reading, you've been putting in some extra time to kind of get some extra ideas. So if you are presenting and you have read a book, just put it at the bottom of your presentation to make the tutors know that you have been reading, you have done your research, and you have not just kind of made up this project, if you know what I mean. So that's the reason why I put all the books at the bottom, just to kind of, it obviously makes it look more professional as well, the fact that you've been reading books. So that's kind of why I put them at the bottom. Next question, how do you create a colour palette? So for me, you can very easily just go on Google and type in colour palettes. So you can, if you want a specific type of colour palette, just type it in and it will come up. But for me, I just kind of look at colours that maybe work well and what don't work well. So obviously studying architecture for the past 3 years now, I've kind of tested the water with colours that work and what don't work. So a lot of my work used to be blue. So I used to have like a blue theme, blue and black. Whereas this year it's very much yellow, black and greys, which I think works really nice. I think it looks really nice. So I guess it's just trial and error, but just kind of test what colours work well together. Definitely just go on Google and type in colour palettes, because you can get like pastel colour palettes, which I've used for projects as well, which look really nice. And that's just a very quick and easy way of getting a colour palette and not spending like loads and loads of time of obviously trying to figure out the right colours, etc. Because for me, I try and make everything perfect. I can spend a lot of time on doing stuff like that, and you're just wasting time that you don't really need to waste your time on. So maybe just go on Google and try and find some colour palettes. I think there's some websites that actually provide some decent ones as well, which I wouldn't know what they're called, so I can't tell you that. Any support and guidance on rendering plans, sections and elevations? It's funny because thinking about this, I haven't actually done a plan, section or elevation since second year, which was, the last time I'd done one was probably May time, so it's been like almost a year, which is not ideal, because obviously all our work up till now has been very much site analysis and kind of the context of the area, etc. But my piece of advice is try and keep it very simple. I know a lot of people try and do beautiful plans, section elevations with really popping colours and materials and people moving around in the spaces, which is fine, and if that's kind of like the style you're going for, then fantastic. But for me, I like it to be quite simplistic. So even if I was doing like materials and textures and stuff within the plan, section, elevations, the one key thing that I would do is definitely shadows. So make sure you got some shadows on there, because for me, shadows just make everything pop so much more. It makes it obviously look three-dimensional, and that is one main thing that I would do. And if you are putting materials in, etc., try not to make them too kind of bold and in your face. Maybe if you've got some bold materials, just drop the opacity massively. So I'd probably put all the materials in to plans, put all your shadows in, and then kind of merge all the layers and then drop the opacity right down, because you don't really want all the materials and the colour to take away kind of like how the plan works. So the main thing of a plan is to show the spatial layout, kind of what each room is. So I generally try and keep it as simple as possible. The easier to read, the better, really. Sections, you probably want to show some more activity. So there's obviously different types of sections you can do. You can just do your bog standard section. You can do your environmental section. You can do like perspective sections, which shows kind of activity that's going on in the space. Elevations, I'd 100% show a bit of context. And one thing so looking at the first year's work, one thing that they keep forgetting to do is putting section lines in and indicating where the section is through the plan, where the elevation line is, so is the building floating. You need a line to like the building sitting on it. Them little things are obviously vital as well. But elevation, show context. Maybe if it's next to some buildings, show that. Maybe there's some buildings in the distance, show that. But yeah, personally, I'd keep it as simple as possible. I think they pop a little bit more when they are quite simple, or you just got some simple colours. Maybe overlay some diagrams over the top that explain each space and kind of what's going on. But yeah, try and keep it as simple as possible, and that's probably the route I'd go down. How are you personally using precedence to influence your design? So very much recently, because we haven't really started designing yet as such, I have very much used precedence, or I've very much used theory to back my process. So I will start obviously then using precedence for my building design. I haven't really got to that yet. So like I've mentioned, I used Bernard Shumi's process, and I kind of used that and I interpreted it kind of and used that as inspiration for my own work. But in first and second year, it's very easy to kind of copy what an architect's done, maybe copy a building design. But I definitely do not do that, because it's plagiarism. You're copying someone else's work essentially. So if you are to use precedence, definitely just analyze key features of the precedence and then show that you're interpreting that in your own design. Maybe there's a really successful project that kind of links to your work. Take ideas from that, so analyze each individual idea and say that you've used this kind of idea to help you inform your design. But recently it's been very much theory based. So the Bernard Schumi stuff, the Sergei Eisenstein in film, in the obviously film theorist. So I kind of use that in backing up my use of the framing and use of mapping kind of time, the movement within the time, the events, the sequence, all that kind of stuff. So I probably wouldn't go too overboard with the amount of precedents you have as well. Maybe get a couple really solid precedents that are gonna you can keep referring to when you're doing your presentation, or throughout your work you can keep referring to them. You don't want to kind of overdo the precedents, because otherwise it gets a bit too much and you don't need all of this. And you start filling pages and pages and pages of precedents which you just don't need. So yeah, that's kind of how I'm using them. How do you create and present your work in a professional way? I think following on from kind of earlier with the colour schemes, the colour palette, colours are very key in explaining your work. If you've got too many colours going on the wall, it doesn't look very professional. It looks a little bit sporadic, it looks a bit all over the place, and that's not really what you want to do. You want to create like a story. You want to create a narrative of your work. Give hierarchy to everything. So maybe if you're doing like a hybrid drawing and you want to represent kind of like your process in your hybrid drawing, maybe show your process through like hierarchy of line weights, or maybe the thickness of that is line weights, kind of color. So I'd probably just be really careful with your color, your hierarchy of like your text size, maybe the images that you want to you kind of want more to stand out. Maybe they could be in the center, maybe they could be a little bigger. So once you look at the board, your kind of eyes are drawn to this kind of drawing in the middle, which you are kind of trying to explain people from that, and then from that point they merge out and they look at the other things. So for me, it's all about the story really, and then for it to look nice, make sure you're using a good text. Make sure the font sizes are correct. You don't want to be overdoing it with the size of the font. You want obviously the colours to be all kind of tied in with each other. So like I mentioned, mine was very much black and yellow, but I use obviously greys in there as well. and you want it to kind of be evenly presented throughout the board. It's just little bits and bobs like that. You just want to, I think the main thing is creating a story. You want people to look at your work and kind of understand what is going on, and for them to look at it and think, wow, that looks really nice, kind of makes sense. And you don't want to bombard them with too much information, because that's something I did in first and second year. I just put way too much information on the board, and it was quite hard to understand what was going on because there's so much stuff up there. So you don't exactly need to put everything up there. Like, yes, you have a lot of ideas, but don't put them up there. Maybe have that in a sketchbook that would be sat next to your board. Maybe obviously have it in your portfolio, which would explain everything, but don't have that all up on the wall, because you don't want to overdo, you don't want to tell too much of the story on the wall, if that makes any sense. Even if that was helpful at all. I feel like I keep going off on tangents here. Anyway, any tips on arranging sheets? So pretty much exactly what I just answered. Crits are by far my worst part of the module. Crits, you probably want to, they're very important. So you could do a lot of work, like I've mentioned, it could be some beautiful work, and then you could present it really badly, which is not what you want. So yeah, maybe try and practice on your crits, whether that's how you're visually representing your work, whether that's your verbal presentation. Just practice. Maybe if you've got some friends, just if you want to run over your verbal presentation, just sit them down and time yourself and keep running over it, and they can help you obviously to take some words out, etc. I guess practice just makes perfect. We've done, like, probably over the 3 years now, we've probably done about 20 to 30 presentations now, so I'm getting fairly comfortable with them. I guess I still get really nervous, I still get really anxious, I still stutter a lot, I still go very red, like I always do. But I am getting better. You kind of get better at representing your ideas and kind of narrowing down what you're saying, because sometimes you can just overspeak and you just oversay loads of things and you give them way too much information and it just starts confusing everyone. So make sure you stick to your time limit, and just, yeah. Portfolio inspirations. So I very much just look on Instagram and Pinterest. I can't think off the top of my head what Instagram pages I've looked at, but I'll probably put them on the screen for you now. And yeah, Pinterest is fantastic, but there's also a downfall to that, because if you haven't got the work yet and you are looking at all these Pinterest and Instagram ideas, a lot of the time it can actually stop you from doing work because you're trying to perfect work that you don't have yet. So that is one thing that I've made mistakes doing. I've wasted a lot of time looking at this work, and I've then tried to do work to look like that, but I don't actually have the work yet, if you know what I mean. So I'm trying to perfect the work that I don't actually have yet, and then it kind of holds me back, and then I don't really do as much work as I possibly could. So maybe just look at portfolio inspirations when you're finally doing your portfolio, maybe a couple of weeks before your hand in, but I wouldn't start looking at that in the first few weeks of uni, because you'll bombard yourself with too many good ideas, and you won't actually be able to get the work done, because you'll be stuck kind of looking at how your portfolio wants to look, but you don't actually have the work yet, if that made any sense. I'm struggling to find time to go to the gym along with studying architecture. What should I prioritise? Okay, so I'll ask you this question. What's more important to you, getting a degree or being fit in the gym? I guess if your gym goals are different, then I'd probably... No, I'd personally say you should definitely prioritise uni, because at the end of the day, you are paying money to go to uni. You're paying a lot of money to go to uni. You're studying architecture. If you want to be an architect, you've got to bloody work hard. And if you are even considering prioritising gym over getting your degree, I'd just prioritise architecture for sure. That's what I've done for the past 3 weeks. Yes, I love going to the gym. Yes, I love keeping fit. Yes, I love the whole bodybuilding thing. Yes, I love eating well, etc. But at the end of the day, I'm at uni to get my degree. I'm at uni to become an architect, and I'm not going to throw my chances away, or throw my chances of getting a really, really good grade away just by prioritising my gym over university. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I definitely prioritise studying architecture. Get your priorities straight, mate. Obviously, you want to find balance, and I always bang on about this. You really do want to find balance, but there's a point where, like, for the past 3 weeks, because I've been so stressed, I know that if I go to the gym, I won't enjoy the gym because I'll be thinking about doing work. And so I just took a conscious decision just to say, right, you need some time away. You just need to focus on your uni work. Make sure you do really well here, and then you can spend a little bit more time over Christmas going to the gym because you won't have as much work to do. So maybe if you work it that way, maybe just work a little bit more now, and then you can kind of chill out a little bit more later and go to the gym a little bit more later. But yeah, I'd definitely just prioritise your degree over going to the gym. And the final question is, how long is your Christmas break? So my Christmas break is 3 weeks. So I break up this Thursday, I think the 14th, and then I go back on the 9th of January. And on that note, I'm going to wrap up this podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. I've kind of struggled with my voice like wrecks. I'm going to try and film maybe a few more this week just so I can get like a bit of a backlog, because obviously I haven't really been uploading much recently. Once again, I do apologise, but like I mentioned, priorities have just been based around architecture at the moment, and getting this degree. But yeah, thank you as always for watching, listening, subscribing to the #1 student podcast in the world. If you have any questions, as always, please let me know. If you want to follow my Instagram and get some more kind of updates, etc., if you want to be involved in these Q&As, drop me a follow at Tom Rowe, or if you want to look at my architecture work, it's Tom Rowe Studios. So yeah, thank you as always for listening to the #1 student podcast in the world. And yeah, legends, peace, goodbye.